Hello, and welcome to another episode of Roots and Hoots, a podcast project produced by the Legacy of Hope Foundation. Since 2020, we have been gathering, laughing, learning hard truths, and sharing in community conversations with Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island. Each episode, we learn something new, and we're excited to be sharing this journey with you. Roots and Hoots is about connecting with and celebrating Indigenous peoples' contributions to their fields of study, work, and cultures. We also speak with allies who share how they are furthering the work of reconciliation in Canada. To learn more about the Legacy of Hope Foundation and the work that we do, please visit legacyofhope.ca.
On this week's episode of Roots and Hoots, host Gordon Spence is pleased to be joined by fellow Cree speaker Cameron Adams. Cameron is a proud member of Berens River First Nation in Treaty 5 territory and is on his journey to becoming a fluent Cree language speaker. Cameron's hope for revitalizing Indigenous languages shines through, making him a powerful example for Indigenous folks seeking to deepen their language learning, wherever they may be on their journey. Please enjoy.
Okay, anos nuitsuao nitsuagan. Ja pilota nuita migo Cameron Adams. I think I said Napio, who's in Manitoba. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Roots and Hoots. I'm your host Gordon Spence. Today my guest is Cameron Adams from Berens River, Manitoba. Hello, Cameron. How are you today?
Oh, tansi Gordon, kitatam skatin. Nimenene tene wapamitan, e peb wapamitan uta. Atuskiwi kamegok. I'm grateful to, come and see you here in the office today in Ottawa. I'm from Gimli, Manitoba. I'm a member of Berens River First Nation and a learner of Inanimwin, otherwise known as Swampy Cree. Nichapanak. Memewizibing kinosu sipik gapeochichik. So my great grandparents come from Berens River in Norway House, Manitoba. Nichapan Edna Monkman ga sinikasut kinosu sipik gagi peopige. My great granny, her name is Edna Monkman, and she grew up in Norway House, Manitoba. Ego se uma gagiskanahamagawian uma ininimuan. So that's why I've kind of started to learn my language, Swampy Cree.
When did you learn to speak Cree?
Nigiate machi tan ta inanimoan ta nanto tepa go pipunaspin kagi machi tayan. It's been about 7 years since I started learning Swampy Cree. When I was in about grade 11, I didn't speak any Swampy Cree. I only spoke English and some French, but at the end of high school, I started to learn my language, and through university, I kept, working with it, and today I'm able to have conversations with speakers.
Growing up, were you taught, I guess you weren't taught your traditional language. You just said that you started learning it in grade 11, and which is quite amazing and quite impressive. You speak it really well, although it's a different dialect slightly from mine, but I understand you. I understand most of what you're saying. And do you speak any other languages besides Cree?
So besides French, English, and Swampy Cree, those are my most comfortable languages that I can speak. But I have some functional capacity in understanding Plains Cree, because I've been exposed to it through my learning. And also, there's a lot of resources that are in Plains Cree. But those are the languages that I feel most comfortable with.
Yes. Yeah, there's Cree in northern Quebec that speak French and English as well. So I think if you went up there, you'd feel pretty comfortable. Yeah. Anyways,
yeah, like I'm pretty open to learning, and I think that especially amongst dialects within even Swampy Cree territory, there's multiple ways to say the same thing, or the accent might be a little different. As a second language learner, it's sometimes hard to replicate that, but through perseverance and kind of determination, I'm puttering away at getting it to the best of my ability.
I know I've never been to Berens River, which is in kind of 3/4 of the way up to northern Manitoba. It's close to Gimli, I understand, and um, Gimli is. Would that be how far would Berens River be from Gimli? I always thought that Berens River was on the other side of Lake Winnipeg or Lake Manitoba on the east side, but it's on the west side.
Berens River is halfway up the east side of Lake Winnipeg.
Okay.
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 So it's halfway up. Across Berens River to the south is like kind of Matheson Island.
Yeah.
And then further south on the west side of Lake Winnipeg is Gimli. So I grew up about an hour north of Winnipeg.
Okay.
And that's where I've spent my whole life.
Right.
Before university when I moved to Winnipeg,
Okay.
and now when I live in Montreal
Yeah.
as a student at McGill.
What compelled you to become an Indigenous language scholar and a historian when you went to university? What made you decide to go this route?
Speak agi machita ya na takiskan hamago ya no menenimwen. Igi entaintaman tanekenu tekiskintaman no menenimwen. Kegwan maga iwi etutaman ni taimu in asitje. Kispin ikiskan hamago ya numa. Egwa egi witamawi o yan. Inu tekiskan hamage yan. Umenenimwen. Egwa inu te opinaman ni taimuin with. So basically I shared that I wanted to work with my language and like really do efforts in learning it but also teaching it. But how would I do this, right? It would become through teaching and different work to keep up my language. Yeah. And my favorite thing I guess about doing this is centering speaking my language and really making sure that I don't let English take over my life. Right. So what that is that for me that means that I'm constantly speaking the language. I take every single opportunity I can to speak in Ninimuin, and with that it's allowed me to really focus my career and my personal life as a language first. Yeah.
So you're Cree? From Berens River. I'm assuming Berens River is a Cree community.
It's an Ojibwe community. So I am both Ojibwe and Swampy Cree through my great-grandparents on my grandmother's side. But I'm also of Scottish and some Métis, and I got French-Canadian ancestry. I got a mix of ancestries going.
Okay.
But like my great-grandparents had, raised my grandma and her siblings in Winnipeg. So we've been urban for a couple generations.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I know that you also studied history. What part of history did you study?
Yeah. So I focused more on Indigenous history in Canada, with a kind of a more general focus on North America. So I've taken some more, specific and kind of broader courses in Indigenous history that look at, different social, political, economical history, while also looking at more of the reality of like Indigenous studies and how systems have impacted us more broadly as Indigenous people in Canada and around North America. So for instance, I've studied the history of like disease and like how diseases, have went over time. I've also studied different courses such as like the history of Canada, Indigenous history to 1815, and then Indigenous history from 1815 to present. So it's kind of more contemporary history is my area of interest and kind of specialty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How important is it for Indigenous people to learn and speak their traditional language, and how does this affect their understanding of their culture?
Nino che iminaitaman e peitaman umainimuen tapaskuto skatisak e ate inanimojek anis kitanisko wago maginowak egi inanimojek gape minagape oche. Egwa Nino oche egwa kagano skatisak ga ate inanimojek Kate ate sake na naskumoya ge kanege uche. Gagi akamenomochek ta ta um ta aya check o taimoino. So for me, I think I'm grateful for all the fellow youth that are learning their language, but also for the elders that had kept that language, right? And had shared it, because munanina, I didn't learn the language from just myself. I didn't learn it for myself, but I also didn't learn the language without support from elders. Michetoak, ketayak, newichehegwak haneke. Lots of elders have helped me along my journey at different capacities, either in university, in language camps, working on projects, and just visiting in different communities. Right? They all help me in different capacities. So I've really had a lot of support from different folks along my journey. I've spent time kapesuena, right, at different language camps, and that has helped me, develop my proficiency. I'm still got a long way to go to be as fluent as I want to be, but I've made some progress to where I am today.
It is a difficult thing to take on. It's almost like a lifetime commitment that because there's always something to learn. There's always words to learn, because I speak Cree pretty fluently myself, and I'm finding sometimes that I because I live in the city and I don't speak it all the time, so I sometimes find it challenging to say something in a certain way in Cree. But Cree, and I guess all the other languages, like the other indigenous languages, Ojibwe, Mi'kmaq, and others, there is. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty certain that in Cree anyway, that there is a high level of Cree. It's called High Cree. That even I have a difficult time, speaking in that high level of Cree, because we've lost a lot of words, a lot of ways, a lot of words, phrases that I don't know if we'll ever be able to recover them. I think if we'll be lucky if we do. So it's so good to see people like you learning the language, and I think more and more Indigenous people are starting to pick up on that, because we understand that languages are an issue today in Canada, Indigenous languages especially, because there is a danger of them, people not speaking them, and so there has to be this revitalization of our languages, and I see that happening across Canada. Knowing the history of Indigenous people is important. That is a big part of what we do at the Legacy Hope Foundation, promoting the history of Indigenous people and what's happened to Indigenous people through residential schools and the 60 Scoop and missing and murdered Indigenous women and children. So we want to keep that going. And I want to ask you, how has the history of Indigenous people in Canada impacted their abilities to live healthy lifestyles?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of with that, like the ability to live healthy lifestyles. I think there's a lot of challenges that have impacted that. But I think there's also, with those challenges, such as the Indian Act, which kind of displaced the traditional life of sustenance that First Nations in different areas of Canada, right? I'm talking like trying to, from a Manitoba perspective, the Indian Act, right? Displaced the intergenerational knowledge transmission of language acquisition and traditional teachings, through the implications of residential schools on children, that they couldn't learn from their grandparents and great grandparents how to live that lifestyle, each generation, right? Because oftentimes, right, you'd have the intergenerational, form of child rearing, right, where the grandparents would, show children the older ways of, looking after, the land, but also being able to hunt, to know the traditional ways of how access these, their territories and really navigate. I think that that's something that was interrupted through systems in Canada, but over time that also influenced language loss with the lack of child rearing due to the residential schools and systems, that remove children from their community, such as like the child welfare system, residential schools, right? The 60s scoop, right? All those have interrupted the once natural transmission of Indigenous languages. But it's also the influence of English in now more current society through television, through media, all these different mediums, that negatively does impact Indigenous languages being spoken too, because it's seen as Indigenous languages. It's oftentimes seen as an opportunity to learn your language, right? As like kind of like you can learn it as a hobby, but to succeed, right? There's this idea of success that you need to learn English, you need to learn French to get somewhere. So I think that oftentimes Indigenous languages have put on the back burner because of negative perceptions and negative, policy, policy that's been punitive if you speak your language, like residential schools. But in this era of trying to be successful and close the economic gaps that First Nations and Indigenous people more broadly in Canada experience, oftentimes Indigenous languages haven't been seen in that as a pathway. To learn your language, does that mean I'm going to be successful? That's not something that's immediately seen amongst many Indigenous peoples, but I see that it's happening now, that people are realizing that there is economic prosperity in learning your language, to actually reclaim that and to work in the field of language revitalization like I've done.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Ayaya songs are about our histories. Ayaya is an Inuit-owned firm that tells our stories in many languages across Canada. They are experts in publishing children's books, usually in syllabics, and they do large multi-language projects like the reports of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Commission. If you need help getting your stories into classrooms or homes in Cree, Inuktitut, or other Indigenous languages, check them out at ayaya.ca. That's ayaya.ca. Ayaya is a proud sponsor of the Roots and Hoots podcast.
Growing up, I was raised by my grandparents, and my grandfather used to always. Now that's really how I learned to speak Cree, and I retained it, by growing up with them, and them talking to me all the time in Cree, because they were unilingual. They never spoke English, but they told me that, and the reason why they were sending me to residential school was that so that I could get an education and that I could speak, and so I'd be able to speak English and function in the new world, is the way they described it. And I guess, the economic sense benefits of, at that time, was to learn English and another language like English, maybe French, but mostly English. But now seems to be this revitalization right across this country about Indigenous people. I think they're realizing that they're losing their languages and their culture. More so than language, though, but I think the cultural aspect of it is really tied closely and loosely to the, I don't know how best to describe it, because that's the way it is right now, right? It's very loosely tied to the culture. And I see a lot of revitalization happening in Indigenous communities across Canada today, and more so probably in the near future, and a lot of cultural camps popping up, different parts, people doing learning their culture, or relearning their culture. You spent 3 years working with elders in a Cree community, developing a new Cree language app in the N dialect, which is the Swampy Cree dialect. You guys call it, or you call it, Nihewin? Nihewin? Like, we never use that word. Where I come from, our Cree is, we say Inuit, Niniwin is really to speak Cree is the word that we use. I wanted to. Can you tell us a bit more about this app and that you're working on? Maybe it's a secret. Maybe you're not supposed to talk about it until it's finished. I don't know. Just whatever you want to say about it. You did some work on it with some Cree elders, and in which community did you do this in?
So I did this work basically from when I was in Winnipeg, because I did this. I've always been urban, right? I grew up in an urban environment, first rural in Gimli, Manitoba, but I worked with different elders that were mostly out of Winnipeg, Swampy Cree elders, but I also collaborated with some folks who spoke Plains Cree for more content in this project, because much of there's lots of dialect, intercompatibility, that it's not that different after all, our languages. Lots of the information goes across dialects.
Yeah.
So I worked on this for 3 years while I was in my undergraduate degree at the University of Winnipeg. And I did this very part-time because for me it was just I was trying to learn the language, but also document and kind of work with speakers to see how this would we could create a living resource so that folks who wanted to access their language, who might not be in community like I wasn't, could do so at the palm of their hands.
Yeah.
This app is something that I launched a few years ago. I haven't updated the app, but what I'm doing with it now, I've pivoted my project. I'm actually working on a Swampy Cree dictionary. And the reason I'm doing that dictionary is because I want to create a really accurate database of Swampy Cree words and verbs and everything in our language, so that we can create resources from that source. Because right now there's no one Swampy Cree dictionary that you can go to for kind of most of your answers if you're looking for a verb or anything in the language. But I want to try to create that. So that our language and the teachers, curriculum developers, elders, that they can see their language represented.
Yeah, you see a lot of language apps popping up now, and it's very interesting. And that would be like a real breakthrough, I think, if you can develop an app that can help you speak Cree. I wanted to just to mention, I was. A few years back, a professor from McGill University was writing a book on the Cree language, the Northern Ontario dialect, and he needed a speaker. He was recording this over a recording machine, and he wanted his students to hear a native person pronounce these phrases and these words, but it was such high dialect, high Cree, that I couldn't say the whole sentence. And this guy, he's a McGill professor, and he's not even native. He's not even Indigenous, but he could speak really high level Cree, and I was really impressed with him. And I was going through a little bit about your biography yesterday, and I came across this thing. I don't know if I was reading this right or wrong. About you being a McCall and a McBain scholar. I was really tempted to Google this, but I wanted to hear it from you, and you describe what it is. What is a McCall and a McBain scholar?
So in 2022, I had applied for the McCall-McBain scholarships at McGill. And this is it was the first global cohort that I applied to be in. The first 2 years of this scholarship, which started in 2021, they were both only open to 20 Canadians. I was a part of the first cohort of 30, which included 10 people from all over the world, international students, and with original 20 Canadians. So this was 30 in our cohort last year. And when I applied for this scholarship, I was looking at a graduate education at McGill University in Montreal, and I had to think of which program I would be interested in, and I chose to apply for Indigenous Language Revitalization, which is a Master's of Arts program. And I also applied to law school at McGill. Eventually, in March of 2023, they had shared with us that I was a successful candidate in this scholarship, and I would be one of the first, like one of 30 in the first global cohort of the McCall McBain scholarships. I eventually, I was accepted into both programs that I had applied to at McGill, and I chose the Masters in Indigenous Language Revitalization so that I could continue my work with Indigenous languages and also focus on Swampy Cree for my studies at McGill.
Yeah. So you passed on becoming a lawyer?
I passed on law school because, and one of my good advisors from years ago at the University of Winnipeg, I had talked with them about this decision. And I'll talk more about the scholarship in a second, but first I'll talk about why I made that decision.
Yeah.
I made this decision because my field, I want to specialize within my field of language revitalization first before I go down an avenue to learn law. Law directly it could be a tool that can help me with language revitalization, but to specialize within my field of language revitalization and really understand the scope of what we're doing in Canada and around the world, I think will give me, an increased knowledge to do the work. So whatever, professional career after that, if I want to study law and really dig into the legal rights of Indigenous languages, or more specifically Aboriginal language rights, then I can do that someday.
Yeah.
But right now I really want to focus on getting my master's in language revitalization first. Yeah.
I think that's a good decision. There's not a lot of Indigenous speaking lawyers that I'm aware of. Maybe I may know 2, 3 maybe. Crees in Manitoba.
Yeah.
The former national chief is from Grand Rapids.
Yeah. Ovid Mercury Sinigaso.
There you go.
Yeah.
He's a Cree speaking lawyer.
Yeah.
And there's another one from Manitoba. I think his name was Moses Okimau.
Oh, okay.
From God's Lake area.
Manito Sagayagan.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So those are, but my daughter's a lawyer. My son's just completed his law degree, and he's just written his bar exam, so
It's amazing.
he's also going to be a lawyer, so
Yeah.
we'll have 2 lawyers in our family.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So what do you plan to do now? I guess you just told me really that what you're going to do. You're going to. I was going to ask you, once you complete your education, the McBain. You just wanted to talk more about the McCall McBain scholarship.
Yeah. So in this scholarship, which is like a global leadership scholarship, we have our regular mentorship sessions every 2 weeks. So through these leadership, not mentorship, through these leadership sessions that we have with the McCall McBain scholarship, we actually learn from different presenters and folks who have an area of specialty. If it's like we've had lawyers in, we've had people who are coaches, and they'll talk to us about, say, a specific case or a specific issue, and we actually work through trying to solve these issues. So it really helps us with our critical thinking. And
Like in Cree?
no, it's all in English.
Okay.
It's our scholarship, right?
Yeah.
The scholarship that I'm a part of. So what it is these folks will come in every 2 weeks, and through these case studies, we might be presented with an issue in an organization. It's all anonymous, right? But what we have to do is we have to think of as if we're in that organization, and we have to actually work through these processes so that we can better really understand how to think critically, but also to act on things. And then with that, I'm able to kind of learn and collaborate with my peers, but also improve my own ability in stressful situations. So beyond that, we've practiced public speaking, we've looked at different cases. We've also had moments where we're learning about community development in such as volunteering and how like non-for-profit organizations work. So we're really trying to get like that next level experience within the scholarship. A part of the scholarship, I mentored. I have a mentor that I meet with every month.
Yeah.
Um,
Mentors you.
yes, mentors me directly. We also have coaching for 2 years. So every month we meet with our coach to talk about our challenges and what our goals are professionally, personally, and they help kind of set a path forward and really help us ask questions for ourselves. And then we also have advising. So advising could be if our mentor doesn't have an area of expertise that we're looking for, we can get an advisor on that specific area of focus.
Wow.
So I've met with like an Indigenous lawyer who kind of told me about the field of Indigenous law and what they did throughout their career. They had kind of shared like, what they've done and how, in the future I could definitely take the route of law
Yeah.
and focus on that after I'm done my first, degree here. Yeah. So that's kind of what our scholarship's about. It's a fully funded professional undergrad and graduate degree with a living stipend and all supports. So.
Yeah. That's like a really well-rounded support system. Like with the mentors and the teachers and the counselors and all that support, really sets you up to succeed, which is good, yeah.
And we're all our own community, right? So that's something that I really like. I'm part of a small cohort of 3 at McGill in my Indigenous language revitalization program.
Yeah.
But with this scholarship, I'm a part of a very, it's a close-knit, community, right, of 30 in my cohort. And then there's more in the previous cohorts.
Yeah.
So that we all have each other. So I don't ever feel like I'm by myself at McGill. So we're all set up to succeed.
So, and I'm sure you will succeed. So what do you like? I mean, you mentioned law as an option. Do you plan on going to law school after you finish this, or what do you plan to do as a career?
Well, there's a few options, right? I'm looking at like getting some work experience, like full-time work experience for a couple years is a potential avenue that I might consider for the fall of 2025. I also wish to get some further education, potentially a PhD one day in the next coming years. So I'm really kind of weighing out the odds and weighing out kind of what will work best for me right now. I'm still a year out from when I would start anything, right? I have another year of my master's, but I want to see what is going to best equip me with the tools that I need to succeed for wherever I go.
Yeah.
So if that's working for a couple years or going for a PhD or studying or, prolonging my studies a bit to make sure I can do it right, I'm really open to what happens and what needs to happen. I think I'll find this out in the next, in the coming months. I'll be kind of laying out these options more carefully.
Right.
But I'm not crossing anything out or saying no to anything. I'm just going to start evaluating what's best for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds to me like you've thought this out, your education and your future. You've thought it out really well, thoroughly, and it's really admirable. I think for a person such as yourself to do something like this, because I mean you only live once, so you got to prepare your life as best as you can. And it's good to see young people like you and others, have these opportunities, because when we were young, we never really had these kind of opportunities and those types of support systems. So I'm pretty sure you're going to succeed in whatever you choose to do. I got one more question, and it's about truth and reconciliation, and why is the process of truth and reconciliation important for all Canadians to be part of? And what is your hope for future generations?
Yeah. I think I was in high school when the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation came out, and the final report by former Chief Justice Murray Sinclair. For me, I believe that reconciliation and the TRC calls to action are really a document to follow and really to honor, because there were thousands of survivors that contributed, thousands of survivors of residential schools, right, day schools, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, who had shared their stories, right? They had testified and shared their experiences. But through this, we have now a call to act. We have to act on the living legacy that so many survivors went through. And with that, I've really taken to heart the language and education areas of these, right? Specifically, right, there's different areas, of creating post-secondary language programs, right? At the University of Winnipeg, for example, they created an Indigenous Languages Bachelor of Arts program, and I was the inaugural graduate last year in June, with my Bachelor of Arts in Indigenous Languages. That was special. My university, my alma mater, they took it seriously, and they made sure that they could offer that degree for me and shape it with unique courses that made it different from a Bachelor of Arts in Indigenous Studies. So
what is it? A Bachelor of what?
Arts in Indigenous Languages.
Languages.
Yeah, so I have an Indigenous Languages BA, as well as with my BA, it's a double major. I have a major in history and a major in Indigenous languages.
Did they, like, when you went to university and you took this course?
Yeah.
Did you actually like have classes in Cree?
Yes.
You did.
So I took 2 classes in Swampy Cree, as well as I did some self-study, and I've taken a couple courses that had me reflect on my language learning journey and more broadly what I've done to give myself the opportunities in the language. So this was called my capstone course. I did a capstone, and I did a course on like an autoethnography. So both of these courses helped me really understand the literature in language revitalization and what someone's journey has looked like. So there's different Indigenous scholars that have written about what it means to learn an Indigenous language and how it's impacted them. So I was really able to write to that and also connect to them. So this all really helped me understand my own journey in my undergraduate education at the University of Winnipeg.
What advice would you give an Indigenous person, a young person, who wants to learn their language, who wants to continue to go to school? What would you recommend, like, to them? Like, go to this university or do this, or what would you recommend? Because I mean, there's a lot of people out there that want to learn their Indigenous languages, but they don't know where to start,
I was at that point years ago, about 7 years ago, where I didn't know where to start in my own learning journey. So all I did was I joined an online Facebook group in late high school, and I bought a couple dictionaries that I could find online. I think the couple resources I started with were Plains Cree, but that's what I had at my availability. And I would say that regardless of what dialect you're learning, if that's what you have access to, it's better to start somewhere than to never start at all because you're worrying about exactly what dialect you want to learn. Because I've had people that have kind of shaped me along my journey and said, oh, this is a resource that might help you speak a little bit more of your dialect, right? And then I meet speakers that help me and lift me up in that. So I think that if you start as your authentic self, figure out where your roots are, and try to pick up some resources, some dictionaries, or join some online Facebook groups, or learn, like, maybe there's a different circle or something at your local friendship center, or like a university course, right? Just to start somewhere, right? No one journey there's no standard for a language learning journey. But I guess to start and to know that, you need to have somebody to support you in that journey. That's what I'd recommend. Talking more about support, though, I think that in my language learning journey, I've had folks that have uplifted me along my way and have said, "Akimina mo, gawin na pagichi," right? "Gawin na pagita na, kitay mo in." Don't, But they said, don't give up, persevere. But I've also faced the opposite in my journey, where folks said, Muna egose, right? We don't say it like that. Muna inanimu inanama, right? They're like, that's not my Cree. Tante uchikina, right? Like, that's not the way we say it. Your accent's different. You have these different things. But I think that that doesn't build people up. It knocks them down. And I think that as nations and as, people that, we have a diaspora of our language right now because we don't have a community that all speaks our language, right? People live urban, they live rural, they live in the community, we're all over. So we really need to uplift our language and really speak it, but also support each other, right? Gawiche hitoak, ta inanimoak, ta mamawe inanimoak, ta opinamak, ke taimo inoawa, right? We need to lift up all these languages, right? And speak them, normalize them,
What is your hope for future generations? Indigenous people, I'm probably referring to more.
Yeah. I think that my hope for future generations is that we keep on pushing the standard and the expectations we have for ourselves and what we should learn in our languages and what services, what forms of education we have. Because in my own personal research and my own personal ambitions, I want to be able to see Indigenous languages taught in every area of this country. I want to see access to services in every capacity so that in us, kina no, misoeska mikoche, ta apachitayak inanimwen misoe tega peochiak, right? I want to see the language used wherever we are, right? So that if I'm in that boardroom or if I'm in the hospital, that I can go there, or if I'm in a government agency or if I'm in a school, that if I want access to that, if I want to be taught in that language, if I want to get, help wherever, that I know that I can have supports in my language and I can go about my whole life within my own Indigenous language. Yeah. So that means we have to all work together to learn our languages. And to learn that, we need to create systems that, and really, from the grassroots, but also systemic change, so that people can work in that language, people can learn in that language, right? There's a lot more hopes that I have, but I think ultimately working in our language is actually going to help save it, because if you're working, that means you use your language every day when you work. So you get paid to learn your language, essentially. That's what we need for Indigenous languages in Canada.
Right. Okay, just a couple of points I wanted to touch on before we let you go. On this language thing and, future generations. And we were at a conference once with Prime Minister Joe Clark, I think it was. And it was a language conference, and there was a few other VIPs there. And Martha, my wife, had asked me if, what should I say, the last closing comments at the conference. I said, well, remember when we talked about what the former Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau had once said, and it had to do with languages. And something, I won't paraphrase because I'll get it wrong, but it had to do with the more languages we learn in our country, as the more languages children learn, the better citizens will become, And she got a standing ovation for talking about that, and I think we both agreed that what a wonderful country we'd have if they made Indigenous languages compulsory in schools, at least one, and for Indigenous people as well. But it'd be super cool if non-Indigenous people could start learning an Indigenous language, and hear them actually speak it. And I agree that it should be probably, maybe mandatory is kind of a strong word, but for it to be used in the workplace as well. and I know that in Nunavut, they do place a lot of emphasis on their culture, to, that their culture be incorporated into the workplace. So, meaning the language and the way they do things, as Inuit, must be respected and must be encouraged to be used in the workplace. Uh, yeah, those are the kind of two comments I wanted to make, and in closing this off, and I too have, hope that the future generations become learners of indigenous languages, and we'll have a great country. I want to close this off by thanking you, Cameron Adams. I've been talking to Cameron Adams from Berens River, Manitoba. He's here with us. He's attending university in Montreal, and I think he's entering his final year. So we want to thank him for coming out and doing this with us, this podcast on Roots and Hoots, and we wish you all the best. And you're an excellent role model, especially in this field, language revitalization. You're a really good example of the kind of people that we look for. You're kind of paving the way, or you're leading the way in terms of young people learning their indigenous language. So I really want to commend you on that, and the work that you're doing, and the learning that you're doing, and the education that you're receiving. So on behalf of the Legacy of Hope Foundation, thank you very much.
So Scott's kinanasko mitin ka pe wapa mitan yuta. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks so much to meet you. It was great.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to the Roots and Hoots podcast and for supporting the work of the Legacy of Hope Foundation to advance reconciliation across Canada. We've had so many inspiring guests on the podcast, and we'd love to hear from you. What was your favorite episode? What have you learned? And who would you like to see on the podcast next? Email your feedback to rootsandhoots@legacyofhope.ca, and your name will be entered in a draw to win some neat prizes in September. Thanks for your support, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.